the Mike Gallagher Show, Mark OMara is a CNN legal analyst. Of course, he became sort of a household name as George Zimmerman's counsel in Florida. He's a criminal defense attorney who frequently writes and speaks about issues related to race, guns, and self-defense. He wrote a provocative column over the weekend that was sort of updated. I think this is an older column, but it was updated after the Santa Barbara killings. I'm a gun owner, and I want gun control. Let's welcome on our guest line, Mark OMara. Hey, Counselor, nice having you on the program. How are you?
Good, Mike. How you doing?
I appreciate you joining us. I haven't had the chance to ever tell you this in person, but congratulations on the terrific work you do, and of course the work you did on behalf of George Zimmerman. Obviously, a very difficult, high-profile case, but I thought you did a splendid job.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Really do.
You bet. Let's talk about your column, where you sort of, and I'm correct on this, right? This wasn't written after the Santa Barbara killings, but it was sort of updated, correct?
That's correct, yeah. I wrote that probably 2-3 weeks ago and just sort of held onto it and almost got some play with it, and then it got timely after this one.
Right. You know, I don't want to challenge you because, as you can tell, I have great respect for you, but I'm just concerned about some of the messaging in your column. You write, another week in America, another mass shooting. This time the mayhem was at the hands of a drive-by shooter Friday night, firing at people in Santa Barbara, 6 dead, 13 injured. Of course, you're implying that all the dead were shot to death. And as you know, his first 3 victims were stabbed to death. I mean, this guy's not a shooter. He's a killer, right?
Well, he's a killer and a shooter, correct, and a stabber. And he's crazy. And he
hit people over the head with a hammer. I mean, supposedly. I mean, this was a real sick, evil young man. But you recognize the sort of knee-jerk reaction that many of us have when we see a column like yours, sort of implying that, well, once again, a guy gets his hand on guns, he shoots everybody, it's a gun control debate. Mark, is it really just a gun control debate, or is this a mental illness issue?
In the Roger case, this guy would have killed if he never put his hand on a gun. I think you and I will easily agree on that. This guy was mentally ill. He had a vendetta against women and society, and he was going to kill with a car, with a gun, with a knife, with a hammer. So, no, this doesn't make it a gun control issue. However, it does bring to the forefront that in this case, as in many, many others, and all the other mass shootings that have happened, that's been happening more and more and accelerating, that guns are used.
But if more and more killings, I wonder if we could look at people who were stabbed to death or beaten to death or bludgeoned, run over by cars. Those of us who cherish the Second Amendment, and I think you do. I mean, you write convincingly that you believe in the Second Amendment, you believe in our Constitution. You say that it shouldn't be unrestricted, though, and you worry about, you state you wish there were reasonable restrictions to assure that only law-abiding citizens can purchase firearms. You'd agree, despite his problems and his troubles, this young man was a law-abiding citizen.
Yes, he passed the necessary restrictions that California has for getting a gun. He didn't have a documented mental health illness before this. He wasn't a convicted felon, so he could have gotten a gun in most any state. It's not an easy answer, both on the Rogers case. It's not an easy answer for anything. I do stand behind the Second Amendment and would love to know that only law-abiding citizens have guns, but we know that that's not true. My real concern, having done criminal defense for years and knowing firsthand how often guns are misused, both in drug offenses and murders and threats and aggravated assaults, it just seems to me that if we get a little bit more rational about how to handle the proliferations of guns, then we might have less killing. It's a huge cruise ship that's going to take a long, long time to change. But even a couple of degree change now might make a significant difference, not tomorrow, but 5, 10, 20 years, maybe the number of gun-related deaths will drop. And overall, that's what I hope for.
You know, it was pointed out in one of the columns I read over the weekend that this area where these killings took place features some of the strictest gun control laws on the books. It's not unlike Chicago. It's not unlike Washington, D.C. You've got a literal outright ban on guns in these communities, which are some of the most violent plagued communities in the country. How do we reconcile that, Mark?
There's not one answer. What I don't want is some knee-jerk reaction, and I agree with you on that. We can't just look at this and say, okay, no more guns, because that's absurd, and it's also not part of our heritage, tradition, and history. Mm-hmm. But if we look at it in a way that suggests that there are ways that we can do a better job of keeping guns out of the hands of criminals and the mentally ill by stricter controls nationwide, I just believe that there's got to be a benefit. There are other countries that have stronger and more historical gun control laws, and they have less gun deaths.
Right, and
that's truly what I'm hoping for.
And that's always a provocative point, because I think you're right. There are other countries that don't seem to have the kind of deaths at the hands of people using guns that we have. But I also know that that's because we're unique in a lot of ways, including our cherished Constitution. And a lot of countries just aren't going to give citizens the right to carry arms. And you're a gun owner, so you don't want your right to keep and bear arms taken away.
I don't want my right to keep and bear arms, but the problem with it is that I know that I'm a responsible gun owner. The problem that we have is that I think we have to focus, and it's a difficult focus, on how to handle those truly irresponsible gun owners. And I'll give you some examples, and you and I might disagree on this. I see absolutely no purpose in an assault weapon in the hands of an American. Second Amendment, over 40 years ago, was not intended to arm our citizenry with the capability to destroy dozens of other people in 30 seconds.
Yeah, but
weapons do that.
But Mark, whether I agree or disagree with that, it's sort of a non-starter, because it's utterly. First of all, what do we technically consider an assault weapon? Because that varies from person to person, even the gun experts. But second of all, as you know, this kid used knives, hammers, and handguns. So the assault weapon issue doesn't even come into play in the case of this tragedy in Santa Barbara Friday night.
Correct. I'm not limiting this conversation to Santa Barbara. I don't think anything would have stopped Rogers from doing what he did. Like I said, he was going to kill no matter what, because it was his mental illness that showed itself, not his use of the gun.
So, Mark, if it's his mental illness that's the prevailing issue here, why then would you? And I'm saying this respectfully. Why take his case as a springboard to make the argument against assault weapons?
Because it has to be part of the national conversation on misuse of guns. And even though Rogers is not the perfect fit, and I acknowledge that, it's going to keep happening. Was Sandy Hook the perfect fit? There was not enough of a conversation about that because we didn't do much in regards to it. Was the Navy Yard the perfect fit? And Rogers certainly isn't. He had a handgun. But the reality is we have to talk as a nation about the manic and maniacal growth of gun deaths in this country. And I think one way to look at it is a restriction on assault weapons. I think I would love to go down the slippery slope to say that we have to have a mental health evaluation before you get a gun. But you and I both know, one, that will never happen, and two, none of us want to go down that slippery slope.
Right.
Because that type of a big brother mentality is antithetical to not our full Constitution and all of the rights, including the Second Amendment.
Mark OMara is our guest. He's a CNN legal analyst, a criminal defense attorney. I can't get my hands on it, Mark, but would it surprise you, because I did see somewhere recently, in fact, I think as recently as over the weekend, that gun-related deaths have actually declined in America. And I think that's true. And that's so this perception, isn't that correct?
That's true. My understanding is overall gun deaths have declined in the past several years. We still far outkill every other civilized country in the world.
Right.
And there's got to be a better answer than just more guns.
Mark, let me just ask you in closing, and I very much appreciate you joining us on such short notice. And again, on a personal note, do you know going into a Zimmerman case like the one you dealt with so famously that it would ultimately change your life? I mean, when you're in the middle of a firestorm like that, do you know it's a firestorm, or do you just go to work and just say it's another day at the office?
Well, I'll answer the way the first person who asked me that question when there was 85 reporters outside my little cottage office, and they said, "Why'd you take the case?" And before I thought about it, I said, It's what I do.
Right.
I had no idea this Zimmerman case was going to turn into what it turned into. I actually thought once the voice testing was analyzed, the screaming,
right,
the case would be over in a few weeks. So literally that was going to be it. I had no idea it would turn into what it turned into.
Mm-hmm.
I just thank, God and 30 years experience that I was able to handle it, in the way that it got handled.
Well, you handled it with grace and class and tremendous professionalism, and obviously a lot of us watched that and saw it unfold and said, boy, if we're ever in a mess, we want somebody like Mark OMara in the trenches with us. I very much appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your busy day to join us today, sir. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, sure thing, Mike.
All right,
Great
take care. All right, thank you. Take care. Mark OMara, again, legal analyst, a criminal defense attorney who argues, hey, I'm a gun owner. I want gun control. I want restrictions on the Second Amendment. Is he right? Is he misguided? You think that, again, far be it from me to argue with the guy who, like him, who's a master in the courtroom, but my goodness, it just seems like a lot of people are using this killing, mass killing in Santa Barbara, to use to dovetail into another agenda: assault weapons, Second Amendment. I just don't know that there's consistency here.